we are definitely recording.
Are you sure?
I am sure. Okay, so we're talking about group lessons, particularly following the conversation. Joe, do you want to move over there so you can see me? I'm going to park myself here. About teaching to the priority as part of the discussion we had about teaching from the balance point by Ed Kreitman, and the idea of making sure that you always have your priority in mind so that the children don't get overwhelmed, you don't get overwhelmed, nobody has a horrible time. So let's just refresh our memories about what group lesson priorities, well, why do we do group? Kit?
To have fun.
Excellent. Hannah?
Form community.
Excellent. Joe?
To go over skills.
Consolidate skills?
Consolidate skills
Good.
in a different environment.
Lovely. I'm going to put to learn to make music together. More please, Kit.
To get to work together.
Good.
Well, yeah.
Hannah?
Motivation, that's kind of the same thing.
No, I think that's definitely worth putting as a separate thing, even though obviously it's connected to all of those. I'm just going to put community, parents and students in case we might forget the parents sitting at the back looking at their phones. Joe?
So it's less confusing to play with other people. It's a different skill completely, isn't it?
Yeah, learn to make music together I think would cover,
Okay.
unless you want to get more specific about what we're actually learning in terms of playing together.
Focuses.
Yeah, I was gonna say this.
Focuses to themselves and to the
Sort
group
of.
as a whole.
Yeah,
Especially if you're
like
playing parts.
different listening skills. Yeah, that's definitely like different listening skills. Playing in harmony. And then what else does group lesson offer us that is not about that child playing at that moment?
Control.
Learning from other people.
Yeah, good. Learning from each other. What opportunities does it give us that you can't replicate in private lessons as well as... Yeah, exactly. Solos in a safe environment, yeah. Anything else? I mean, we've got some really big catch-alls, haven't we? So like creating community could be broken down into 101 different things. Consolidating skills equally, learning to make music together, working together, particularly I think like that kind of, you know, there is a discipline to that, isn't there? There's a discipline about how to work in a class, how to work as part of a team, how to behave in front of parents, other people's parents. It's very different from an individual lesson.
Yeah.
You can, if you so wish, put up with a lot more behaviour in a private lesson that is maybe not ideal, but you can bend how you're doing it to that child and their parent. Whereas as soon as there's some other parents and their children in the class, if you keep bending in the same way, you're putting them out, you're putting them second. And so it's a very different, you know, which is why for some, I'm just going to make sure that's not going to blow, for some, you know, certain circumstances such as extreme special needs or neurodiversity, it may not work to have every child in group. And I don't think that we should feel that Suzuki's not for that child if they can't participate in group at the moment, but we always keep trying to find ways to bring them back into a group setting eventually. But you know, we are, I think, quite a radically inclusive organisation at Suzuki Hub, and that means that there are some parents who say things to me like, so and so is disrupting the class too much, and I say, no, I'm sorry, that is part of their special needs, and part of my commitment to inclusivity is having them here. But also there are certain situations in which it is like, yes, that is too much and that child can't cope with being in group and is making it too difficult for the other children to learn, so therefore we say, okay, let's try in a year.
Question: if there's a child observing and that child is disruptive and the parent is making, obviously trying to calm the child down and making just as much noise, would the teacher say something to that?
Yeah,
Or-
ideally, yes.
Okay.
You would say, sorry, I think so-and-so needs a break, you need to take them out for 5 minutes and then try again, or have a chat with them after. If it's the first time a child and their parent are observing, it's very difficult because you don't want them to feel put off and told off the very first time. So unless it's really like causing a massive problem, you'd probably just put up with it for that week, but try and speak to them afterwards and say, while you're observing, the expectation is, you know, that the class happens as if you're watching TV. You're not like interacting with it, or you're not disrupting it, and therefore if I say to you, you know, okay, let's give so and so a few minutes time out, let's just be on the same page about it,
But if it's not the first time,
then hopefully either you would have had that conversation, so it would be then fine for you to say, can you take the child out for a few minutes please, or if there's a bigger problem. I think we may be talking about the same individual who we have decided for the moment can't do groups at this point,
Yeah, I think
because
so, yeah.
their special needs are too high for us to be able to cope with in group, and it's too upsetting for them as well as for the other children. But if you have worries about that particular group you're going to take some of, you can talk to me about it when we're not on camera.
yeah, no, I was wondering just in general.
Yeah.
About that.
In general, I think the aim is like usual, like we're trying to face it head on and say, you know, in the first instance, say to the child, what I need you to do is show me that you can watch quietly, because once you're able to watch quietly, then you'll be ready to join in much quicker. And if you're not even able to watch, then obviously you're not ready to take part. You know, can you, if I don't have to tell you again today, you can have a sticker at the end, come and see me, or something like that. And then if that doesn't work, and you know, we've had some really shouty parents be like very difficult in observation type situations, or with their children in group, like shouting across the room over the teacher, you know, bah, you need to, like, watch your teacher, pay attention. You just sit there thinking, but you are currently causing so much more disruption than your child. But in most cases it can be sorted out with a quiet word afterwards, like, you know, you can leave the teaching to me. If I feel your child is not paying attention, I will bring their attention to me. But if you then shout it from the back, you're pulling their attention in two different ways. You're not actually helping them pay attention to me, you're helping them pay attention to you, and it's disruptive for everyone else. So just leave it to me and we'll see how that works as an experiment. Or you can say to them, you know, I need you to be with your child and take them out, you know. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Any other questions at this point?
It's interesting when you see the parents, because for me, I try and involve the parents in the group as well. And the group I have here, the parents are quite good, and
Yeah.
even if they're on the phone, not on the phone very long, and they click in when I need them to click in. But I've had groups in the past where you even try and involve the parents and they're just unaffected, like they've zoned out completely. So I think in that list of why do group, it's for the parents to see. Yes, the community is there already, the parents and students, but it's for the parents to see that we're not asking them to do anything that everybody else isn't doing. Would you stop?
Yeah.
I'm giving her faces.
I'm gonna put different listening skills for students and parents there. Because I think you're right, and I think one of the things that happens in that situation is that we lose our confidence because we think it's going to be too embarrassing to say, you know, like it's quite easy if you've just done something with the kids to say, okay, parents, can I just have your attention for a minute so I can explain why we were doing that? But then if there's still people on their phones or in their books, and it takes a lot of confidence to then be like, sorry, can I have all of the parents' attention for a second? And then if they're still going to be like, you know, Hannah's mum, do you mind just like, you know, because it does get to the stage where they will feel embarrassed, and that's kind of appropriate because they're not behaving how they should be, but you don't want to, especially if you're much younger than all of them. Like I remember when I was in my 20s, in situations like that, I'd just be like, I can't tell a bunch of parents who are 10, 15 years older than me off. Whereas now, like, you know, in orchestra there are always parents who are so delighted to see each other, and I do end up, and I'm pleased that they're happy to see each other, but I do end up saying, like, guys, if you want to have a chat, I don't mind if you don't watch group, but please can you go and do it in the foyer, because I'm trying to teach.
The opposite thing.
Well, that's for orchestra though, so
Okay.
it's different. It's not stuff that they're going to go home and practice.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that, sorry I said group, orchestra. I wouldn't say that about a group. I'd be like, you know, I'm delighted that you're happy to see each other, but can you catch up after group? Or, you know, go and have a coffee during the week. I'm trying to teach you here.
In regards to that, if you were like trying to get like some parents' attention, and you know you said it the 1 week, and then the next week they continue, could you say, like, I don't know, like if you guys have really got other stuff on your mind, go outside of the group, or not really? Is that like, obviously politely, but say you obviously got too much on your mind to be, you know, paying attention in here.
The thing is, so this comes down to a never-ending, especially since mobile phones and smartphones have come in, discussion amongst teachers about what the role of the parent is in group lesson. And I think essentially, unless you're working in an organisation where you are told what the line is, which I don't think this is that, it's up to you as the individual teacher to decide what you're happy with. I'm very aware that there are lots of parents sitting in group, even in a beginner or a book one group, you know, if this is your second or third child, you know what they're doing, you know how they're going to bow in the air for "O Come Little Children." You've done it twice already with 2 other children. Does it feel reasonable to me to ask you not to have your phone out and to sit there paying attention as if it's all very, very exciting and new for 40 minutes each week? It doesn't feel reasonable to me. I'm quite happy for them to be on their phones, as long as when I say, parents, can I just explain something to you, everyone goes, yes, Kate, like you've got my attention, and then they can zone back out again. Because I think most of the time they're not going to take in that much from group. But I know that there are lots of people who, if I said that to them, they'd be absolutely askance, and that's up to them. Like if they want to require the parents to be 100% focused on the group, that is up to them. I do think what is quite unreasonable is if you ignore the parents but you're upset if they're on their phones or reading the newspaper or whatever. I just think, well, if you're ignoring them, why shouldn't they ignore you? If you want the parents to be 100% involved, then maybe run a beginner group where the parent sits behind the child or sits in front of the child, and you know, you have the pairs of kids and parents working together. Obviously, if a parent was there helping a child bow on the E string, looking at their phone, you would be like, sorry, are you okay? Do you need to take a work call, or can you put your phone away to help your child? But I do think it's a kind of old school assumption about respect, or the demonstration of respect, which isn't even necessarily to do with actual respect, that we kind of instinctively feel they shouldn't be ignoring us in group because we're here working hard to make their children better and they should be paying attention. But actually, if they know what they're doing already, or they don't feel that that's something that they can understand in that context, even maybe it's the opposite, that it's too difficult for them to pick up. You know, I think it just needs to be thought out. And for me, what I've come to feel for me is that I'm happy for them to do whatever they want, as long as I can kind of call them back for a few moments at a time.
It is, I've got a question first. When would a parent stop coming to group lesson if a child is no longer got their parent in their individual lesson? Or like, you know, when they just...
So, again, the rules are all for you to decide. I think it would be weird for you to require a parent in group lesson once the child's practicing independently. Quite a lot of the parents in my big group will come because that's where they get to hear their kids play. They're not invited into the lesson anymore, and so they quite like to sit at the back and listen to them and kind of be like, oh, and also top group sounds bloody brilliant, right? It's much nicer to sit through an hour of Bach double and McLean Shardash than it is to sit through an hour of E string retext and busy stops or 40 minutes. So I think again it's up to you. At Suzuki Hub, we don't require the parent to come to group lesson ever, because it's one of the things about inclusion for me that, you know, if you have to send your child with a friend or with a childminder or with one of their friends, you know, I don't want to only cater for families whose parent can come twice a week during work hours.
In the baby class, one of the big things that is meant to be happening is that you're helping the parent observe how their child is learning, and then trying to do that in a really positive, encouraging positive like steps kind of way. So you'll be like, did you see how they shared that with that person for the first time this week, or how they had the confidence to like join in with the singing or whatever. So you kind of in that you're trying to help them make these little observations so that they can then help reinforce them. So I think if and seeing your kid learn in a group is probably quite rare, really. Like unless it's like a sport or something. So maybe that's the main. It's like if they can see that their kid's the troublemaker, then they know that they can. They might need to work on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing to keep in mind about all of this is the amount of emotion that it brings up for a parent to have to sit and watch their child interact and not be able to get involved. And so if you are watching your child be naughty, you're probably going to be really embarrassed. So it's more likely that you'll get your phone out and put your head down, because that's not the moment for you to get involved. Or you become the shouty parent who's like, Hugo, stop bashing so-and-so with the bow, you know, like, and then it's kind of inappropriate. So it's a very odd and unusual position for us to put these parents in. And I think also we are often not clear what the parents' roles are. Like, you know, I've heard teachers kind of be like, I can't believe that they just let their child behave so badly in group and didn't take them out. And I was like, but did you ask them to take them out? No, well, no, but I mean, it's their child. I've got 20 kids in my class. How am I supposed to cope with it? And I was like, if someone came up and took their child out of my class without me asking them, I would be having a word with them afterwards saying, leave the children with me. When I need your help, I will ask you for it. So that's just a completely opposite, like, you know, neither is right or wrong. It's just, it's all about communicating with the parents. Your role here is this. And, you know, if you are a private lesson teacher who says to the parents quite a lot, which I am, your role here is as a silent observer and positive, you know, like when you want to say something positive, always say it. But if you've got something negative to say, leave it to me. I don't want to hear it. Then it's very confusing for them to suddenly be expected to reprimand their kid or control their child somehow in group lesson with probably even the same teacher, but certainly within the same organisation, you know. So I think it's just about communicating with the parents what, you know, what it is that you want. And I think one of the ways that you can, if you do want them to be more involved, there are some really easy wins. So let's write those up. Like that, so how can we, I don't want to forget about this, but we've still got 25 minutes. So just quickly, how can we make the parents feel more involved so that they're less likely to check out? Just call out some ideas.
Address questions to them.
Yep, ask questions. Excellent.
Include them in the register.
I'm not going to say no, but more?
Do it with the children. Like when the children are doing like the bonus, they can do it as well.
Yep. So give them tasks. Good. More?
Know their names.
Know their names. And of course, you know, you can get name tags for them and ask them to fill them in. You know, if you don't know them.
Get them on email and send like
Yeah.
extra bits to them.
Send emails to them. Any more before I share my thoughts?
Send a link to a video on YouTube you've been watching.
Yeah, like that. That's
Yeah.
kind of in there, isn't it? I think like address them directly is sort of in ask questions, but you know, get used to saying, parents, can I just have your attention for a minute, blah, 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 whatever it is you want to say to them. Get them to come and help. Give them a parent quiz. The children love a parent quiz.
What is that?
It's just anything like, you know, who can tell me the name of this piece, or you know, how do we find the key signature, or like, it depends what level it is obviously, but just anything. Parent quizzes are a big hit with the children because often the parents have got no idea and then the kids love that. Ask them for positive comments after solos. It's really easy just to teach the kids and just leave them. So
sometimes asking their feedback on the sound, because when you're playing, actually you don't necessarily get you don't get the spectator sound.
I'm just going to ask them for feedback because that works in many different ways, doesn't it? You can, like, you know, say to them, is there anything you'd like me to do that I'm not doing, either by email or in person? You know, top tips, like you could have a once a week parent top tip for practice. Okay, in our practice this week, I found it really helpful to X, Y, and Z. Or, you know, give them a little bit of homework, like can you find something interesting to share with us next week, whether that's a handout or whether that's, you know, a book, or like basically get them involved.
Listening recommendations.
I mean, I know get them more involved is not how to involve parents, it's just telling you to do the thing that sits on the board. But you know, once you start thinking like that, then obviously there are loads of things that you can do. Good. Would somebody please take a picture of the board?
I accidentally got the definition to you that tastes like tomato soup.
Oh, yuck.
Yum.
In what way?
It's got basil in it, and that just makes me think of like pizzas. Not nice.
Take it to the food bank and buy yourself some more, given that a pack probably costs the same as one coffee in a coffee shop. Right, I'm going to leave those there, but now we're going to talk about how to use teaching to the priority within group. So, if we look back at this list and we think about our priorities, so our priorities for teaching generally are what? Number one?
Posture.
No.
Motivation.
Thank you. They've got to want to do it, otherwise it doesn't matter how good their posture, tone, intonation, musicality is. Group lessons, unless they're not enjoyable for the students, tends to be a motivating factor without you having to actually add in extra things to motivate the children specifically. Like the whole way it's set up is as a motivational tool.
I think that was the thing that was actually making me feel stressed though, is because I was basically wanting to correct things so much that I felt a bit stressed, and that can then
That the joy was leaking out.
Yeah.
So I think the joy is really, key. And I think also fun, joy, and then sort of purpose are not interchangeable, but they're all part of the same kind of role of group, aren't they? And of music and in your life generally. Like, sort of like that discussion about, is the goal in your life to be happy? Like, or is it to have purpose, meaning, you may not always feel cheerful. It's not about being cheerful all the time. You can be cheerful and very hollow inside, and you can also be very serious but have a really fundamental sense of purpose to your life. And you know, lots of the great philosophers will say that purpose is the thing that brings you satisfaction, and it's actually not happiness that we want, it's a feeling of satisfaction. And so yes, it's important to have fun in group, especially for the little, well, I would say for all ages, but you know, you won't get the 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds to actually do what you want them to do unless they're having fun, whereas the teenagers, you can kind of drag them through 20 minutes of scales that they might not be loving because they understand that it's going to really help them with their Vivaldi concertos or whatever.
You could add flow to that as well.
Yep.
Because there's very few environments that are safe for you to feel connected with other people around you, and that sense of flowing through the music, through harmony,
Yeah.
working together, and feels like it doesn't have to be articulated, it's kind of just inherent.
Yeah. So I think the motivation is the core reason to do group, and the core reason that we worry if it starts to feel like they're not motivated by coming here. But in terms of then leading down from that, what do you think should be next in terms of our priority list? So in private lessons we're thinking motivation, and then posture and tone and intonation sort of side by side really. So what do you think in group? Playing together. I would sort of say that we don't want to lose track of posture and tone and intonation. I'm going to put intonation here. They're kind of, you don't want to ignore them, but they're not something that you probably work on, let's say particularly books 1 to 3. Whereas playing together, definitely, and tone, I think, if you're playing together but the tone is not good, that's not motivating. But equally, if you're not playing together but the tone is good, that's also not motivating. So I think the tone and the playing together are sort of a bit interchangeable in terms of you can't really have one without the other, a bit like tone and intonation.
I say to them, well, for the group concert, I was like, I'm going to argue against posture being in a bracket. That the group is like you're hearing one sound when you're in a group concert, but you can see every single individual as if they're a soloist. So, or on the front row. So they need to look amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think why I'm putting posture in a bracket there is because if you've got a child who's not learned how to do decent posture from their private teacher, it's very difficult for you to fix it in group unless you actually start to ignore the rest of the group and give that child basically mini individual lessons during group.
And it doesn't work. That's the thing I found.
Yeah, well, it doesn't work because either you need to spend too much time with them, and that's what I mean about it becoming like a little individual lesson, then you're ignoring everyone else, or if you just remind them but they don't actually know how to, or they don't have the skills to, or they don't have the motivation to play with good posture, then that's not going to work either, which is why I've put it in a bracket. It's the same with intonation. If you've got a child who's playing really badly out of tune, you can improve it slightly in group, but I don't think, unless you actually change the balance of how much attention you're giving each child, I don't think you can teach how to go from poor intonation to good intonation in a group setting. So that's why the brackets are there, is like, yes, they're important, I haven't missed them off completely, but they're sort of things to keep an eye on and keep good rather than to try and fix in group.
This does makes me think that there are different priorities at different group
Definitely.
levels, because for me book 1 is almost all about posture. Like, well, I do the other stuff, but like so much of the activities are just like repeating like posture basically.
But you say that, but then if it were were just posture, they wouldn't have to play anything in book one. So what happens when they play? They're playing together. So it's, yeah, I think you're right. I think the posture in book one is more important than later on, and it is. Maybe I'll just take these out and say yes, they are there in importance. I guess it's about maintenance and developing rather than teaching from scratch. There are some things we can teach from scratch in groups. What are those? What can we almost not teach in private lessons?
Working together.
Yeah, working, like, especially with your peers. Like, if you've only got one child in your private lesson, like most of us do, most of our lessons, you can't teach them how to, you know, play two different parts without a teacher being on one of the parts. You can't teach them how to listen to each other equally. You can't teach them how to be on a level with each other, because there's always an imbalance between student and teacher. So it's different when you're doing, you know, you might do the same games, but it's a different vibe. So I think sort of cooperation between students, you know, musical cooperation, physical cooperation, learning how to, you know, how to sort of take part in a group without bumping into other people, you know, teasing them, laughing with them, talking with them.
Allowing them to take turns.
Yeah, all of those sort of social things that are then recreated within the music. And that's kind of where the discipline comes in, isn't it? It's like you do learn a lot of discipline, and it's not discipline like you get shouted at kind of discipline, but you learn how to, you know, that's why group classes, particularly the early levels, are so much more chaotic than private lessons. And I think one of the mistakes we can make is to try and feel like the group lesson should behave like 10 private lessons happening at once. But when you've got most children, even the little ones, in front of you, the cooperation between you and them is high because there's one of you and one of them, and their parent is in the back. So they're, you know, kind of overruled by the adults who know how to behave. Whereas as soon as you flip that and you've got a group where there might be 15 kids, it's going to be much more chaotic because they're just learning how to control themselves when they're in the rabble, you know? And I think that's fine, and I don't agree with the kind of hardcore teachers who will spend 25 minutes just learning how to be silent and get from rest position into playing position so that you all look like a perfect, you know, cardboard cutout of each other.
Synchronised swimmers.
Yeah, I think that that's really appropriate a little bit later on. I don't think that's a really good use of a 4 and 5 year old's time. I think it's much more useful to, you know, have fun together, motivate them to want to be a child who can spend 20 minutes doing that when they're 8. You know, the my way or the highway thing is a bit problematic. And I think that lots of teachers, especially in pre-Twinkle and early Book 1 groups, worry that the children aren't learning enough because there's so much sort of chaos and madness. And I kind of think if all they learn in 40 minutes group class a week for the first year is that they love the violin and they want to come back, I mean, that's a great use of however many £100 it costs their parents to send them here, in my view. And also, it will never be all they learn. They will also learn that, you know, Jimmy always gets praised for having a good bow hold because he's got a bent little finger, and so if I want that praise, I better do that myself. And, you know, that when I do my solos, I feel nervous, so I better practice a bit more next time. Or, you know, like all of these other things. Of course they're going to learn those things as well, but I think it's really easy for us to worry that if there's any chaos the parents are going to feel like this is just a waste of their time. It's like playgroup. And, you know, out of all of them, many complaints I've had about Suzuki Hub over the years, which is just part of running an organisation like this, it's a very small percentage of parents who complain about that for pre-twinkle and early book one groups. And to be brutally honest, most of the complaints I have had about that have been about you know, a kind of situation of a private school parent who've never actually watched their child interact with other children in a learning setting, just drops them off at school and picks them up, and in their mind this is what happens in the classroom, and the reality would be very different. And I think most of the time it's about them just coming up against that realisation rather than something we're doing wrong. But I've had way more complaints that the children are not having fun, not enough gets done, there's so much time spent getting all the bow holds perfect or getting all the violins up, and once they've got to the end of one row, the beginning of the row started sagging, and why can't they just play? You know, like that kind of, those complaints are much more numerous. And you know, like again, it's about what kind of teacher you decide that you want to be. You have to make that choice. But I do think, you know, especially for the parents, especially at the less experienced end, if they're watching you take a 40-minute group class and they're thinking, I'm paying 16 quid for this group class, if their child comes away having played every twinkle variation, done some singing, done some clapping, and done a funny game at the end and listened to a solo, they're going to feel like they've got a lot of value for money. Whereas you might think they've done 3 really brilliant bow holds and it was perfect and that's worth £16. They're not going to think that, mostly. Did you have a question?
I had a parent say something to me the other day. She was like, she was, it was a bit rowdy today, wasn't it? Because she doesn't normally come. It's because her husband was away, and so she was the parent that was coming because the child was quite small. And I said, some days it's like that, some days it's not. Most of the time it's not. I was like, yeah, but they all learnt something. Did you learn something? She said, yes. I said, there you go.
I think the other thing is, if we feel insecure, we can take a parent's comment as criticism when it's not necessarily meant. Like someone might say, it was a bit rowdy today, and what you might hear is, you weren't in control, what were you doing? Why were you letting them all muck around? And if you have the confidence to be like, yeah, some days they're a bit off the wall, you know, often, especially if they've had wet play at school, I mean, you know, you can just basically, if it's raining, you can, like when they can't go out in the playground because it's raining, you can basically start every group on a wet play day and say, they're going to be a bit mad today because they haven't run around enough. So, you know, just to let you know, and like probably every parent will be like, oh my God, what a brilliant teacher to take that into account. And you know, your response will guide them as to how to feel about it. If that parent had said they were a bit rowdy today and you'd been like, oh my God, I couldn't control them, I didn't know what I was doing, it was terrible, I'm really sorry, then she would have walked away thinking, oh, Joe was a bit crap at that today. Whereas if you're like, yeah, it's fine, we had fun, look at what we did, then she's like, oh yeah, of course. Like, so I think don't underestimate your capacity to sort of influence how it's received as well, and to also misinterpret what people mean. That, you know, sometimes we can have someone say something that we think is a really strong. I used to think one parent here just hated me because he's always just glowering at me every single time. And when he left, I was sort of like, oh my God, thank God for that. And then he wrote me such a nice email, like, I'll really miss coming to the Hub, it's such a place of joy, and I'm really sad that my kids are too old to come anymore, and you know, it's been an amazing 10 years that we've been coming. And I just thought, oh wow, like that, his glowering at me was actually just like, he's having a really hard time in his life, and he comes to the Hub and feels like this is a real like uplifting place to be. And I just like, every time he walked in the door, I'd just be like, ah! He's gonna shout at me. So, you know, yeah. Okay, so to wrap up, I think
specifically about
yes,
book 3 then.
yes.
What are the priorities in book 3?
I would say that basically we kind of take that list on the right, but you're developing it as you go through. So if you're thinking at the beginning of book 1, it doesn't matter if they're kind of not playing perfectly together, if their posture isn't great, if they're not cooperating very well, and there's quite a lot of just running around and screaming and being ridiculous, that you think, okay, and in book 2 we're starting to refine that, and by the time they get to book 3, you know, they're at the end of primary school, the beginning of secondary school, you would expect them to be able to get ready when you get ready in pretty good formation. You would expect them to be able to hold their posture, you'd expect them to be making a nice tone and to be able to engage with work on tone and intonation if that's what you choose to do at that time. In terms of the technical things, lots of shifting, lots of work on different dynamics. They should be playing pretty well together by then. If you're like doing, for example, Le Gavotte, and after the pauses, they're all coming in, then you would work on that. They shouldn't be mucking about and need sort of telling off if they're being stupid, too stupid, like, and that they're playing, it's the quality, isn't it? Like, basically, that when you have worked on something all together and you're clear on what your priorities for that piece or for that piece of work are, that they're engaging with it and that they're all taking on their individual responsibilities to make that better in themselves and therefore as a group. Mm-hmm. Does that help? I think I'll be able to help you more once I've watched your group. I think the other thing is, are you planning?
I am, but often my plans shifts when I'm in the room and I'm seeing.
Which is absolutely what I want, because I think if you plan and then you are immovable about it, that's not good teaching at all.
And I'd say also I haven't. How long are you planning? Necessarily in that, like, sorry, what were you going to say?
How long are you planning at a time?
Yeah, so I usually have a big think like ahead of the term.
Yeah.
What I've realised my first term, I was kind of like, this is everything I want to cover, and I was being quite experimental, kind of just introducing all the different aspects. And this one, I've tried to like look back at what I was doing last term and pull out the more important things and it's also for what they're about to do. So the solo concert and obviously they have the group Allegro concert as well. But trying to fit in around that. But just like I said, my main feeling from last time was there's so much to work on. There's just so much to work on.
I mean, yeah.
And
there really is.
And it felt like way too broad. Like this is just all so much.
Yeah.
And then I didn't know how to approach this term.
Okay. So I think that in terms of picking your priorities, it is partly this priority list and then the specific techniques for each book or level, but then it is also partly personal choice. Like, if you said to me, I've got 3 terms, the first time I'm going to focus on really playing together, that's going to encompass different bow strokes, dynamics, and, ritardandos, tempo changes. The second term I'm going to do shifting, and we're going to do loads of shifting stuff, and the third time we're going to work on deepening our tone and making it more beautiful. I'd be like, okay, great. But you could also have come and said, the first time we're going to work on working as a team, being nice to each other, making positive comments, playing loads of repertoire so that we know that they've actually got that bank of repertoire ready for the toolkit that we need at any time. The second term we're going to work on up bow staccato and separate bow staccato and lifted strokes, and then the third time we're going to work on solos and leading or whatever. Then those are equally valid choices, and if you kind of think of each year with your group, you may or may not have that group next year, but you definitely have it unless something bad happens for a year. You just can't do everything. And you're not their private teacher, and therefore you can't be responsible for plugging the gaps that you may or may not see in other people's students. So, when I was teaching the book 2 group and we did loads and loads of shifting, I saw kids who were sort of doing dodgy things, and I would say to them, can you talk to your teacher about that? But at the end of the day, unless you're actually going to teach every single one of your students in your group, which lots of people do choose to do, but you can't do here, then you have to just kind of be a bit relaxed about it and think, okay, well, I'm offering you what I think you need at this stage, but if your teacher is not taking the same approach, then there's going to be a sort of bit of a wobble. Like, you're not going to damage anyone.
No, but I feel that the thing that I feel is that I'm quite transparent. So if I'm looking at a bow hold and I'm like, like they know that, and yet it's like nothing. And I've tried to like explain how I would do it, and yet it just feels like very I need to maybe be less transparent with my expression.
Well, I think there is that, and I also think talk to the teacher, talk to the parent of the teacher, to the parent of the student, and if you're really concerned about something, talk to me about it and say, I've just noticed that this is happening with this group of children. Maybe it is one person's teaching, and I would go and talk to them about that. But also, there's always one of the biggest things, the biggest challenges I think here for me, and I suspect it'll be the same for you, is to accept that there are different qualities of teacher. And as much as I would love to only employ the best teachers and we're all on the same page and we all have students who play pretty much the same technically, that's not possible. We have 170 students. We're going to have some teachers who don't have the skills and haven't educated themselves to learn how to fix things like a dodgy bow hold. And also that teacher now might be a teacher who's fantastic in 10 years time. And so it's all, I think it's just about sort of trying to offer what you have to offer and not trying to worry too much if you we can't be everything to everyone.
Yeah, I think I'm learning that like at this level you can teach things and they bounce back basically, because there's so much that's been ingrained. Whereas with the tinies, like it seems like everyone's more on board. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway.
Also at that age, the students have a lot more say themselves. Basically, if you've got a 5-year-old with a dodgy bow hold, it's not really their fault. It's the teacher and the parent. But by the time you're talking about a 10-year-old, they can be told and told and told.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you kind of have to think, okay, well, if you don't care enough, then maybe I should be chilled out about it. And like I'm always trying to say to myself, like, why do I care that they fix this thing? And I will try and say to them, the reason I care about your bow hold is because you won't be able to do up bow spiccato with it looking like that. And sometimes I just think, okay, well, you don't believe me, you haven't had that feeling of like, oh my god, this doesn't work. It's working enough for what they're doing at the moment. And so, unfortunately, even though I can see the brick wall coming and I want to avoid it for them, if you can't actually explain to them in a way that makes them listen to you, you kind of have to just let them go, that's why she's been going on about it for 2 years, it doesn't work, and now I want to fix it.
No, I have to fix it.
It's annoying.
Yeah.
But, there we
It's the
go.
same at any age. Don't think it's the age group. I work in a college and trust me, 18, 19, 16-year-olds, whatever, it's the same.
43, I mean,
we've
we've all got things that we know we should do differently.
It's like, I can see where you're going with this, and I can see it's going to be a problem for you. But as a mum would say, your head is hard. If you can't hear, you must feel. So, if you can't hear, you must feel. So it's a character thing.
Your head is hard.
Your head is hard. If you can't hear, you must feel. So you should just let it go. And it's like,
Yeah.
And you don't have to acknowledge it.
And now come to it.
Yourself.
And also, like, I have seen in my career as a playing musician, people who have wonderful experiences of playing the most fantastic music and love their jobs, who have major technical problems. And
get some money.
well, it doesn't stop them, I mean, maybe it will eventually, and maybe it will be heartbreaking for them because they haven't paid attention to their posture and then they're in permanent pain by the age of 45. But you can't, you just can't do it for everyone else. You can't stop them making those mistakes. We can't even stop ourselves making some mistakes. So I think we've just got to, kind of try and chill about it a bit and offer what you've got to offer without killing yourself if you feel like you're not giving, don't try and give 100% to every single person all the time, because you will just end up at 0 yourself, and then if you burn out and quit, you don't have anything to give to anyone else.
Do what you can, leave the rest.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all very with what you wanted
Yeah,
from the
lots.
session? Good. Excellent.
Thank you.
Let's have a bow before we go.